thank you so much for coming and joining me on your developing, learning, assessing students in the specialist single subject classroom. I'm very excited to see you all here and share my own learning as assessment so far. So a little bit of who I am. I'm a PYP music teacher here at Chadwick International. This is my 9th year, I believe, teaching. I started in Kuwait and went to China and now in South Korea. I also co-moderate a very popular PYP chat, Twitter chat on Twitter with 9 amazing moderators around the world. So I highly recommend everybody to join that if you're on Twitter. It happens every other Wednesday. I host a particularly successful podcast that I'm very proud of, Recess Duty, that I gather friends and colleagues around the world to share their stories about education. And it's just a lot of fun, and it is a good passion of mine. I always try to share what I'm currently reading as we are lifelong learners and we do try to continue learning. So the 2 books I'm currently reading is Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown and Pop-Up Studio by Misty Patterson. Both incredible reads for educators who are wanting to be more student driven, understand where students' emotions might be coming from, or even understand where our own emotions are coming from. And my pride and joy, my dog Weston is a golden retriever, and I am a pet owner who I love very much. And you might hear him in the session. I can't do anything about it. He is a very large, very loud dog. So before we start, let's do a little bit of a checking in and seeing how comfortable are we with assessments. And now I'm sure everybody has known the blob tree, as you can see where various people are. And in the chat, just very quickly, where do you think you are on this blob tree and in terms of assessment? And this is something that I would use with my own students in terms of any concept, any skill, any strategy throughout the day, throughout a unit, and to see how they would grow, or maybe if something would struggle with them, or maybe there was a question that maybe perked their curiosity that made them go down a little bit. So this is something that I've used quite often.
So we have the whole range here, everything from 2 to 17. We have a lot of people in the middle at about 10, 11. Yeah, but basically the whole range. And someone has specifically said that they're 17 minutes when they do it collaboratively. Otherwise, we don't know. Yeah.
Fair enough. And so on those, once I get those numbers, even with students or with colleagues, given this presentation before, I always ask 5 questions. Are we stuck? Can we improve? If so, how? What can we do? And why do we want to? So if we are at 17, why do we want to move? 17 looks pretty comfy to me. So why do we want to move? Are we okay with that? At 10, are we stuck? Are you stuck on that ledge? Can we improve? At 20, if you're at 20, can you improve? If so, what is that going to look like? And how are you going to do that? These are some of the questions that I ask my own students to perk their curiosities in becoming a more self-adjuster of their own learning and see how they can do that. Because as a specialist, we have 300 students, upwards to 600 students at a time. And so giving very personalized feedback is very difficult, but throughout the session, I will show you how I've been able to do it, hopefully successfully. So being a risk taker here, and with my good friend Lou, I decided I'm going to try to do a little Slido thing. So if you go to slido.com and enter 419266 and answer the question in one word, what does assessment mean to you? In one word, or you can scan the QR code with your phone. It works either way. And we're going to see a word cloud of what does assessment mean to us so far.
Someone's put it in the chat. Someone said opportunity, which I think is really relevant.
Agreed. Collaboration, reflection, growth. guidance, understanding, celebration of learning. I like that one a lot. We do that a lot. Directional.
I love this. I feel like we should publish a blog or like put this out there somewhere, because a lot of this is so relevant. Do you take a screenshot?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't, again, as assessors and self-adjusters, we have to document our learning and where we are from here and then moving forward. So now that we see that what assessment means to us collectively, let's continue going and let's look at this comic. This is one of the first comics I was shown as a teacher in my very first school. And it took me a very long time to find this comic, but this comic is by, it's called A Play Creation by Sandra J. Stone. And I just want us to look at it, think about it, develop some ideas and some questions, and we can put these in the chat. And let's see if we can come up with an idea as, is this assessment or is it not assessment?
We have a lot of yeah, everybody's saying yes, it is.
Now,
Assessment.
so now that we have an idea of yes, it is, what is it an assessment of? So it's not an assessment of just one skill or one subject area or one ATL or one strategy. It is a teacher giving students agency through a collective culture of classrooms to show understanding through a way that makes sense to them. And so that is what exactly I'm going to be talking about, of how I've done in my own classroom and within music, and to share that students creating understanding of their own making and design.
And it's interesting because this is relevant across subjects and across everything that you do in an inquiry classroom, whether it be single subjects or units of inquiry.
I had a very wonderful colleague, my very beginning of my career, say good teaching is good teaching regardless of subject or content.
Yeah.
And it has stuck with me a very long time.
Yeah.
Tara, yes, as for and of, that is, we are going to be talking exactly as of that. So the three questions I want us to think about while, and when this section of the session is, why is self-assessing important? Why is it important to learn reflective skills? Notice that word reflective, coming back to our word cloud being reflection, being a big one in there. And why do we need to know a variety of assessment tools? So I want everyone to pick one of those questions and just give it an idea. Why is self-assessing important? Is it important to learn reflective skills? And why do we need to know a variety of assessment tools for our classroom? And these are some of the questions that we're going to try to spark with us as we go on through our session today.
So we have lots of things in here. That it's, you know, Fatima says it helps to plan next steps in the process of learning. Self-assessing helps learners take ownership of their learning, which is, I think, really important. And then it says Cindy says, yes, the ability to reflect, identify problems, and work towards solving them is the key to lifelong learning. Samira says self-assessing helps students think about their thinking. So metacognition. We have Pritisha, who says self-assessment promotes reflection and reflective thinking skills.
And
Yeah.
these are all amazing ideas. And this is exactly what we're trying to do, is develop lifelong learners for students that are going to turn into adults one day, that are going to be able to solve problems in a variety of different ways, regardless if it's a music problem, math, literacy, physical education, and so forth. So luckily, a couple of years ago, I identified that assessment was something I needed to work on. Again, like I said, I have 300 students here at Chadwick International, and I knew assessment was something that I drastically needed to reshape, readjust how I approach things. And so I started my inquiry project of developing authentic assessments with the question of, how can I assess 300 students across multiple grade levels effectively while also supporting student agency? And this was a very big inquiry of mine. And so through that inquiry, I went through a creating cycle that we use here at Chadwick. And the first part, and the 3 questions I asked was, where am I starting? What can I do tomorrow? And what can I start to change? And if any of you are like me and you go to PD sessions and you're like, yes, this is all really great stuff and I really understand it, but what can I do tomorrow? What can I change tomorrow to make my students' lives a little bit better, or the learning a little bit more richer and fuller? What can I do tomorrow? And these are the questions I really looked for and strategies I looked for, because I wanted results not next year, but tomorrow. So I started exploring this idea of assessment of, for, and as learning. And with here, we have 1, 2, and 3. And I just want to put it out there and see which ones do you think is assessment of, for, and as learning. So I'll give you a little brief overview of each picture. So number 1 is this one student following a tutorial of how to create a song. Number 2 is a little boy following his creation, or his musical pattern that he created. And number 3 is students helping each other document their learning of playing a pattern on an instrument they created.
So in the chat, they're saying that this looks like differentiation in assessment, and it's assessment as learning is what everybody mostly thinks. We have lots of people saying as. So they say 1 is for learning, 3 is as learning, and 2 is off learning.
Exactly. And again, if we think of that pyramid that we've all seen of assessment of, for, and as, we want most of our assessment coming from the assessment as learning instead of learning. And so what I was trying to do mostly the last 2 years is move away from most of my instruction from number 1 to more of number 2s and 3s types of assessing, of really getting down on the ground with students and conversing with them about what did they create, how did they create it, why did they create it, and what are some struggles they're having. So with these questions, I had to really come out with an idea of the difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right. And I needed to come up with the differences and similarities and connections of when might I actually use both of these? When might I do them? And is it okay to do them? And those are something I had to ask myself as an educator and as a practitioner of music, because there are going to be times when there is going to be a point where maybe there is going to be more of a highly formal assessment. Maybe there's going to be a point when there isn't. And these are the questions I was going to ask you all is, when might we actually use both of these?
I'm waiting for the answers to trickle in. So Tara says left for individual assessments. I think that Samira says for assessment as learning. I think the interesting thing is that there's space for both when we are assessing, and it's not, there's no right or wrong, and it's very, very possible to use both of them in a meaningful way. Ragini says it varies for different grade levels. Nandini says one is one when you want to do like individual assessments, one when you want to do collaborative. Amal says that the left is for end of unit or year to assess knowledge, and right is when you want to give them agency.
Agreed. And all of these questions and answers and ideas and thoughts are valid, because I truly believe that it isn't black or white, but a balance between both highly formal assessing and assessment as learning. Again, we are not getting rid of the ACT. We are not getting rid of the SAT. We're not getting rid of WIDA. We're not getting rid of MAP. We're using these tools as a way to plan next steps. And how we help our students get to them is we work really, really hard on those ATL skills of communication and critical thinking and research, so that when they get to a point where they have to sit down and take a very standardized test, they aren't so much freaked out about it, but it's not all that we are doing. So I had to move away from doing very worksheet-based things into moving into a very collaborative approach and more going forward. So in the next section, we're going to talk about actually how did we do this? How do we assess authentically? How can we assess more efficiently? And most importantly, my biggest question is, how do we get learners involved in the assessment process? This one was a big question for me because, again, there was 300 of them. And I wanted to make sure that every kid was reached and every kid was heard and felt valued, and that they belonged in their own learning process. Because at the end of the day, it is their learning, not mine. And I had to be respectful of that. So we started with a plan. So we're moving from exploring to creating a plan now. So the objective of this plan was more student involvement in planning. And so each one of these was a graphic map. The picture on the left was the students creating questions of challenging parts. And the picture on the right was identifying the challenging parts. So if you could see here, each section was labeled a challenging part, which was created by my friend. And the sticky notes was strategies to overcome that challenges. So students were already starting to create ways of identifying challenges and also identifying friends they could collaborate with to also better support their learning on these challenges within a particular song. Another way we did this was in grade 2, we created, so I am a big fan of centers. I love using centers in learning because I think centers help to self-differentiate, self-adjust, students self-adjust. So this was a dot method that I learned from Andy Vasily at Kaust School in Saudi Arabia. There are 6 stations and we have red, green, and yellow dots. Red meaning not yet, green meaning good to go, yellow means challenging. And what we're trying to do here is find that just challenging. We don't want those students to stay in station 1 if they're continuously showing a green level of understanding. And what this is working towards is scaffolding towards building their own levels of understanding, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But this I found to be really, really helpful when having a lot of students in a particular grade level or a particular subject matter, because this was just hung on the wall. I had one for each class and they kept track of their own. As you can see, their names by their dot and of each one. And then the question was, well, how do I know if I'm green, yellow, or red? So then we came up with these challenge scales and we created our sections of no support, little support, some support, and a lot of support. And so if a student I was able to complete the activity on my own, they knew that they were at a green level and they were able to go and put that on there, which this was during distance learning. So as you can see, most of these dots are green or yellow, and we could do this on Jamboard electronically. If the student needed a lot of support to be able to finish the activity or to finish the activity, they knew they were ready and maybe they weren't ready for that at this time. Now, the point where I really loved was when a student was like, I'm in the middle. So I said, okay, so does that mean you're yellow, a little bit more yellow, green, or a little bit more red? And that was when they really had to think about it and self-adjust into their own category of, okay, so maybe this one's a little too hard, but this one's a little too easy. So let's work on this one to build up for that other one. Again, here is the 5 challenges. This was reading pitches on a staff for music, and all 5 classes created completely different challenges that they identified across their classroom. And what was really great about this was once this was up, students from across the classes could actually ask their friends from a different classroom how to help or how to solve a different problem or challenges using a different strategy. So we no longer were working within one classroom, we were actually working across the grade level in this particular example, which was one of my really favorite moments of this particular unit. Something I hear a lot of the times when I talk about assessment or when I talk about specialist or especially math is there's just so much to cover. And something I had to really get to the heart of was the greatest enemy to understanding is coverage. And that was by Howard Gardner. And I had to really let go of the idea that we needed to cover every single thing, like Jessica was talking about earlier, that we needed to cover every single standard to the depth of which we needed to, but more or less giving us a very general understanding and a conceptual understanding allowed us to go deeper. So once we started having those plans in place, we started create ways of getting students more creativity, getting more student creativity and less me. I wanted to stop giving them things and letting them start correlating their work and such. So this was a melody flip grid. And again, this was not 5 flip grids, it was 1 flip grid for grade 2. And every student created a melody, very short, that they screen recorded, that they analyzed. They gave a brief overview of why they created it. And students could then go back and share their feedback and share their, oh, I really like this about it. Oh, could you try it on the xylophone this key, or could you try it on the metallophone in this way? And this was really great to creating that culture of learning, because we were no longer just tied to one room. We were creating a culture of 5 classrooms working together in music. And this was within our melody unit. Another way we were able to create was we used classroom materials. Again, this was the stations I talked about earlier about students creating melodies and documenting in a way of their choice. Some students wanted to record, some students wanted to take photos, some students didn't want to do either. And I said that was up to them, that it was entirely their portfolio of their learning and their journey through this, as this was progress over product, that we were not looking for the best melody, but we were looking at how we were growing from day 1 to the end of the unit. And this was 3 students showing 3 different ways. Another wonderful example, and this was, and I'm a huge, if anybody's followed me on Twitter, they know I'm a huge proponent of Canva. I love Canva because they have such amazing graphic organizers that are almost already pre-made that really just let you go forth. So the song here is Keep the Music Going, and each section had to do a particular skill. So number 1 was identify the difficult section of music. Number 2 was read the section of music. 3 was practice the section of music. Number 4 was record the section of music. And then I asked each student to ask about how did they overcome it? If they were struggled with reading it, if they struggled with practicing it, if they struggled with recording it, how did they overcome that? And then could you share that back with me so we could share with the class? This is one beautiful example by a student in grade 3 this year. And this is something I'm going to continue doing because the reflection and the thoughts that came back was really, really powerful of showing self-adjusters. Again, another way we created learning, going back to what Jessica was talking about, those learning walls, this was 5 classes, grade 2, creating, identifying challenges, identifying where they were. As you can see, the dot method of if it was just their just right zone, or if it was too hard, or if the part was maybe too difficult for them, how were they accompanying this learning with them, and what could their questions be? And my most favorite part about this is who could they ask? So instead of always coming to the teacher as the expert, we now have created a room full of experts at different elements of music that they could also ask each other. And this, I read this on a blog the other day, and I thought this was absolutely wonderful, and I couldn't help but share it. It was, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn, by Benjamin Franklin. And I think that really comes down to the fact that when we involve our students in the co-construction of learning and the levels of understanding and the activities that we do and the questions that we ask, not only are they more of it in because it is their classroom, but they're more into it because it was their idea. And how we do that in music, well, this is how we tried. The feedback section was giving genuine supportive feedback was the objective. And this, again, was one of the hardest parts of as being a specialist, in my opinion, was because we have so many students and I want to make sure that everybody gets feedback. So as you can see here, we have the standards of which we follow here at Chadwick International, but the concept they follow under, which is rhythm, the musical element. And so what we wanted to do in grade 3 this year was really work on students developing their own levels of understanding. And so I started this entire conversation with, what does it look like to be a beginner? What might it sound like? What does it look like? All the above. What does it look like or sound like to be a developing? And what does it look like to be proficient? And these were some of the answers they came up with on their first try, their rough draft. Feels worried, trying very hard to do it right, struggles to complete, starting to rhythm journey, thinking a lot while playing instruments, worried about rhythms. Notice that a lot of them were not so much about individual correct answers, but the feelings that it came back to. Playing harder piece than beginning, struggling but not giving up, asking questions, kind of confused. And then this is where I was like noticing that we were getting now into getting the right answers instead of actually finding a deeper understanding, which is why we started going, I turned it into a cyclical model instead of a linear model. So students, because I was trying to fight an initial feedback that beginning was bad and proficient was great, like I couldn't break it. And so I turned it into a circle where no matter how great they were always going to come back to being a beginner. And luckily, if Cindy Blackburn's in the room, luckily we worked on the amazing blog that I'm very proud of that is with Toddle of also creating self-adjusting. And we have wonderful resources there and a beautiful podcast episode that talks about more about this assessment journey of mine that I hope everyone will listen to. This was 1 week of feedback after getting students to identify their strategies and their plans and the way they were going to achieve it. Because they were able to do this on their own, I was able to step outside of the classroom and confer with each individual student at least once, try to do it twice. I don't think I got to everybody twice, but I know I got to everybody at least once and was able to give them very specific feedback on elements of music that they wanted. So as you can see, some of it, like, so this yellow sticky is in their handwriting of what they wanted feedback on. So I was able to really be specific in what they wanted to grow in. And then the next question in our next section of our category here is, what assessments take priority? What type of assessments do you use regularly? And what do you want to change about your assessment practice? So go ahead. I've talked a lot because that was the meatier chunk of the presentation, but I want you to answer one of the questions in the chat and maybe start having a conversation with somebody that also goes back and forth on your question.
I think the part, all of your examples were amazing, just really cool, and also especially love. And I think a lot of people in the chat also really appreciated the centers and how you sort of did it across platforms, whether it was in person school or whether it was virtual using the Canva templates. That was really cool. We've also dropped the link to the podcast. I think Katie just dropped the link to the podcast in the chat as well. So people go watch it, go listen to it. I think podcasts are super powerful. We are getting Levi. There are a couple of answers here. So Pritisha says assessment of learning always takes priority in many school
Agreed.
contexts.
This is
Con says self-assessment and peer assessment take priority for him. Then we have, Rajita also says assessment as learning is what she prioritizes. Tara says being consistent and following up with assessments done, acting upon them, reflecting, that's important. Whether you may be doing different types of assessments, but and focusing on different things, but the intention behind them is the big one. Katie says, I've been thinking a lot about the PYP enhancement model of time we spend monitoring versus reporting learning. She feels as though they as a school prioritize reporting on learning far too much, a big growth area for them in the coming year.
And I think that's actually probably a big growth area for many schools in many contexts, because I know in just my own context, we spend a lot of time working on the reporting part. But when we actually look at the PYP practices and principles, reporting is actually the smallest section when we look at the 4 dimensions. And we're going to talk about the 4 dimensions of assessment momentarily. But Katie, wonderful idea and questions. And I'm going to be right there with you this year working on that as well.
Yeah, and a lot of people want to, involve students and co-construct assessments. All of the chat is about that as an aspiration. So to all of those people, I think this is a very relevant webinar, and a part of the guide that we have created on assessments is dedicated to developing and growing assessment capability. So check that out. There are a couple of videos in there and some templates for you to use in your classrooms.
Awesome. With that, thank you so much. And let's continue going, because I know we have some more wonderful ideas. So we have the 4 dimensions of assessment here. Again, looking at reporting being the smallest slice of the cake, pie. I like cake better. And monitoring being the largest section. So how does this being reflected in our classrooms? This is something that I personally had to really think about and reflect on my own practice as a inquiry PYP practitioner within a very skill-based, content-heavy subject, and really change how I teach and really change how I assess. But before we could change, we need to know, well, what is monitoring, what is reporting, what is measuring, and what is documenting? So this is just a very quick, I'm going to say monitoring. What is monitoring? And there are no wrong answers. What are assessments that might go in the monitoring section of the graph here? What do we think? Observations, for sure. Pictures, videos, conversations, student work, interviews, discussions. Yes, discussions is a huge one.
There's drawings as well.
Drawing. I just saw that. Drawings would be such cool. Conferring, agreed.
There's lots of discussions.
Open-ended tasks. All right. And then let's go on to documenting. What would documenting in the classroom look like? And hopefully what I'm going to be able to do is get this chat back, and then I will put all the ideas in each section, and then I'll tweet it out. So if anybody wants to check it out, please follow me on Twitter, and you'll get to see this momentarily with everybody's ideas.
Yeah, we'll be sure to share the chat with you, Levi. Cindy says documenting is like monitoring, sister evidencing. There's a lot of portfolios and learning journeys, student work samples, skills developed, notes on observations, inquiries, running records, rubrics. A lot of portfolios in there for sure.
And then what would measuring look like? Again, we're getting to the smaller sections of the pie/cake. What would measuring look like? What would a measuring assessment tool look like within our classrooms?
Grading, quizzes.
Pupil tracker. I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, what is a pupil tracker? That's the first time I'm hearing that.
Love it. I'm excited to hear about it. Tick sheets, checklist, yes. Continuums. And then finally, but not least, because it's still on our chart, or still on our pie, but not as large, reporting. What might reporting look like for us in our classrooms? Parent conferences, exactly. Exit slips. Feedback, goal setting, three-way conferences, student-led conferences, agreed. And so when I think about these is how can we turn all of these into a continuum of constant going back and forth and making sure that we're getting to all of them, because they're all very important, but also making sure that we're not spending too much time in the sections that we don't really need to be spending that much time in. Okay, let's go to the next one. Because sorry, my chat is, everyone's very excited about this. Because I know the chat was going to talk about report cards, and I knew that report cards was something that I wanted to get better at, of really honoring people's and students' learning in agencies. My objective with the sharing part of my inquiry journey was the students share more than me. So for instance, I created a Google form of grade 3 report cards. I inserted all of our areas of strength that we came up with, our areas of growth, and our next steps for each one. And I asked the students to think about it critically, and we spent the entirety of the class, so 45-minute period of them selecting specific ones with examples and ideas of what was going to go into their report card. That was tabulated into an Excel sheet. I was able to copy and paste it right into our learning management system. And from there, they were able to talk specifically about to their parents and during their student-led conferences and their parent-teacher conferences of why did they select rhythm, performs and create music in simple meters. Oh, because in music that one day on this example as shown here, I was able to do that right here. Why did they use rehearses and performs and creates music with pentatonic patterns? Oh, well, because in our cultural unit, I was able to create pentatonic patterns to accompany a cultural song that we learned in class. And so by doing this, not only was I giving them complete autonomy over their own report card, but I was also showing them that, again, the product is not what is important, is the progress. Regardless of whether they were beginning, developing, or proficient was irrelevant. What was most important was them being able to identify an area of strength, an area of growth, and a next step that they could do to achieve that. And that's what we did here, was we were able to reflect driving next steps. And so as you can see, this was what you saw before, but this one was a blank rubric that we used for 3 songs using the levels of understanding. Again, that cycle of not bad, not good, but a cycle of learning, challenges and strategies. So they had to come up with different challenges that were for them specific for each song, because not every song is going to be challenging for every student, just like not every standard in math or PE or art is going to be challenging for every student. And then the strategies. And then they were able to collaborate and talk with one another and help each other with strategies about, oh, that's a really good strategy for that song. I wonder if it'll work for this song. Oh, that's a good strategy for rhythm. Let me try that and see if it could work. And again, because I'm a Canva lover, all of these were created on Canva, so they took very little time. And reflection would not be complete without a simple exit ticket, like we talked about before, of our ATL skills self-management. So one in my current unit for grade 2, I believe this is managing time and task effectively. And the questions here they had to answer was, where are you and how do you know? And what can we do to continue growing in this skill? Again, none of the questions being very positive or negative, but where are we and what can we do to grow? And as you can see here, we had students multiple days after giving it back, circling different, oh, I was here, now I'm here. And this one was the round 1. So again, not having to always be teacher driven, but also could be student driven as well. And again, I love that Jessica set up the presentation so beautifully with the discussion of learning walls, as these are our reflections and the students chose what to put up here. They chose that they wanted to put their rubrics, their goals, their strategies, their challenges up for people to, not so much people, but more of students can also share with each other. And as you can see here, we were exploring, we started to look at patterns, we looked at challenges and how we could overcome them. And then here we looked at what does it mean to be a learner in our learning cycle. So again, there is no bad or good within our learning cycle. It is just, we are starting to begin and we are proficient, and then it gets harder. If I could figure out a way to make this a 3D model where it could just loop over itself, that's what I do, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. And we're going to end with something I truly believe very much in with Dylan Williams from Formative Assessment of most of what our students need to know hasn't been discovered or invented yet. Learning how to learn used to be an optional extra in education. However, today it is a survival skill. And this is something that I truly think of as an own learner, as something that things that I wish I would have been taught as before, and something that I want to do for my own students. Again, I always say, I'm not here to create the best musicians. I'm not here to create Beethovens or Mozarts. I'm here to create students who love music and who love learning. So throughout my inquiries and journey of assessment, these were the 5 books that I kept referring back to. Was Embedded Formative Assessments by Dylan Williams. Funny enough, Trevor McKenzie's Inquiry Mindset Assessment Edition. John Spencer and AJ Julian's Empower. Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And Multipliers by Liz Weissman. These were the books that I kept coming back to about giving back to students, about letting the ball roll back to them and making sure that they were working harder than I was. Because after all, if I am working harder than they are, who is doing the learning? And so my challenge for you tomorrow, or whenever you get back to your class, is three tips to try whenever you get back, is to allow students to track their own progress through journals, self-assessment charts, reflections, peer-to-peer chats. Number 2, use dot charts, blank rubrics, learning cycles to get students to reflect on changes needed to grow. And number 3, embedding ATLs into your practice to support developing independent learners. And what that looks like can be very different. My way was just something that worked for me. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it was the best way to do it. I'm saying it worked for me. And what I would suggest you to do is take an idea and make it work for you in your context. Because if there was anything that we learned today in Jessica and my sessions, is everybody's context is very different and unique, and it's going to look a little bit different regardless of which way we do it.